Very unusual earthquake right now. So if you woke up this morning in certain areas and you thought, wait a minute, did my house just shake? That can't be. Well, you did not imagine it, I can tell you that, because at about 5:30 a.m. March 5th, a shallow earthquake hit near Coushatta Edgefield in the Red River Parish, close enough so that people felt it from Shreveport across the Ark-La-Tex. And there's the part that should grab you. This was in California. We're talking about North Louisiana. And I know the area quite well around Shreveport. And how I always remember it for the most impressive lightning storm that I have ever experienced in my life, I have to say. It was kind of scary, I also have to say, because there were tornado warnings and stuff like this, but it's a beautiful area. I really enjoyed being there. But a magnitude 4.9 earthquake that was shaking not only northern Louisiana, also into other states. So let me break this down. What we know about this quake right now and why it's so unusual here in that area, and what faults, that's important, and what geology is hiding in this region. And the big question, of course, for everyone is also right now, was this natural or was it triggered by human activity? So what happened? What are the facts that we can anchor? And multiple reports have been put in about this magnitude 4.9, and there seems to have been a foreshock as well. It was shallow, only roughly 3 miles. That's about 5 kilometers. And the shallow, being shallow, that matters a lot for how intense it feels. And people felt it across a very wide area, because in the central eastern US, the seismic waves can travel surprisingly far. I'll get to that. And according to a Louisiana report today, this is now being described as the largest inland earthquake in Louisiana history. So it is significant, and it's one of the strongest overall in the state's recorded history. There was only one bigger one in 2006, but that was offshore. So why did it feel so big, too big for where it happened? So let me explain this like you're holding 2 different blocks in your hands. If you hit a soft, cracked block, the vibration dies quickly. If you hit a hard, cold, old block, the vibration shoots through it. It's like a bell ringing. This is how it behaves. And a lot of the eastern central US crust, it's older and it's more rigid, so shaking can spread farther than people expect. So a shallow quake is like a louder shaking at the surface. And 4.9 shallow, that does something. That is really intense if it's shallow, especially in a region like this. So Louisiana is not on any big fault line like the San Andreas Fault, for example, or a subduction zone or anything. So what moved? That's the big question in the room. And this is the twist. In Louisiana, you don't have one giant famous fault line drawn on every classroom map, but that doesn't mean the ground is perfectly solid in that area. What we do have in this area, we definitely do have that. Ancient faults in the deep basement rock. Basically, we can call them old scars. And we have a heavy stack of Gulf Coast sediments above them. And we have a region that is shaped by big structural zones that basically can guide where the stress builds and also where it releases. One example that geologists discuss is a set of deep transfer or transform style structural zones that line up with major river corridors in the area. The Mississippi River, the Red River alignments, they show up in Gulf Coast structural interpretations. And we need to do an important reality check because it gets messy when you want to look up that area in the internet. So many people are mentioning the Red River Transform Fault. So you will see that name online, especially in industry secondary diagrams. But whether that exact name feature is the specific fault that slipped today, it's not confirmed. So we need to wait a little bit longer. So treat it like a possible regional structural zone that people reference. It's not a proven smoking gun for this quake that we just experienced here. So what likely happened is simpler. A fault slipped somewhere under the region, let's say like that, probably a previously mapped one, but not a famous structure, or like somewhat a blind fault that doesn't have any dramatic surface trace, so we don't really see it. But this still raises an uncomfortable question. And I said, is it natural or is it man-made? So I know that you will ask that. But before you ask that, could you do me a favor and like and hype this video? It doesn't cost you anything, but it helps my channel. So thank you for that. Could it be linked to oil and gas activity, fracking in the area? Now we get to the part that makes this story explode online right now. A Louisiana report today points out something very specific. This quake actually happened in an area that overlaps the Haynesville-Bossier Shale. That's a major natural gas development region, and there has been an uptick in smaller quake in the region since December 4th. About 10 smaller events. So could fracking have caused this? Let me explain this so that we're really clear what we're talking about here, because that's important. So fracking can mean two different things that people mix up often. We have hydraulic fracturing, it's called HF itself. It's like short bursts of high pressure fluid to crack rock near a well. That's that. And then we have wastewater disposal, injection, right? They're pumping volumes of fluid underground like over long periods of time. So both can be associated with seismic activity, don't get me wrong, but in different settings. So the USGS, for example, notes that injecting fluids under pressure can reactivate faults by changing the pressure at depth. It can act basically like a lubricant. But what's the core mechanism? So imagine a fault like two heavy blocks of sandpaper pressed together. Normally they're stuck because the friction is high. But if the fluid pressure rises in the right place, it's like slightly lubricating it, like lubricating the contact and reducing the effective clamping force. And then the fault can slip with less stress than it would have needed naturally. So that's the basic physics behind fluid influenced quakes. And I want to point out to a video that I will put in the end screen because they have discovered fluids in one of the monsters of the earth, in the Cascadia Fault Subduction Zone, the big one on the west coast of Canada and the US that can produce a megathrust earthquake, magnitude 9 plus, with a tsunami after 8 to 15 minutes up to 100 feet. What that means, check it out in the end screen. But what does the research say about the region that we're dealing with here in Louisiana? So study of the broader Haynesville or nearby area have discussed earthquakes that may be linked to energy activities, including cases where evidence points towards hydraulic fracturing or wastewater injection, depending on the sequence. So yes, It is plausible, but here's the key line you should understand. Plausible doesn't mean proven. So to prove a link between the two, the scientists typically look for things like timing. Do quakes start after injection ramps up? Location. Do they cluster near certain operations? The depth. Does it line up with injection horizons or deeper basement faults? Either one of them, right? So what are the focal mechanisms? What direction did the fault slip? Pressure pathways. Can fluids realistically even reach the fault? So right now, the public coverage is saying we're waiting on more detailed geological, seismological analysis in that area. The quake was really high for that area. And we have shaking until East Texas and Arkansas. So widespread shaking. And that gets me to my explanation. Why is this quake so unusual for Shreveport or Northwest Louisiana? Because it checks multiple rare boxes at once. Magnitude 4.9 is big for Louisiana, especially inland. The location, not a well-known major surface fault zone on the public maps, right? So that raises question. The shallow depth makes it feel sharper and more widespread. Recent pattern, we need to talk about that. Reports of increased seismic activity in the broader area in recent months has raised eyebrows. Certainly has raised eyebrows. There has been increased activity since January with several quakes over magnitude 2, over magnitude 3. So that combination is exactly why people are talking about it like a mystery right now. So what do you think will happen next? What's the risk and what should we watch out for? This is not an area that is, at least to current knowledge, capable of producing large earthquakes magnitude 7 or higher, magnitude 8. So after a quake like this, aftershocks are definitely possible, but they're not guaranteed, but possible. One report coming out of Louisiana today specifically notes the possibility of additional shaking in the region. But, again, if you live in the area and you feel another earthquake, do the drill. Drop cover, hold on, especially if you're near some shelves that could fall down, glass or anything that can fall, right? Don't be alarmed that the big one's coming. All these rumors, most aftershocks are smaller. And if you want to help the scientists, file a report with official channels. What did you feel? How long did the shaking last? These public reports help map the intensity. And what do we need to watch out for the next days? So do we see a cluster of aftershocks lining up in a line, in some line that would hint that we're dealing with a fault plane? Do the agencies release a clear statement about whether it appears natural versus potentially induced? Because if this turns into a sequence, that's when the story changes. And we do have a little bit of a sequence here since January, right? And they called the earthquakes, especially since January, a phenomenon of minor earthquakes in Louisiana. And a professor of the Centenary College of Louisiana. So he's a geology professor, and he has been invited by the Shreveport City Council to speak about these earthquakes. That was even before we had the big one, the 4.9 right now. They wanted insight into the recent earthquakes that have affected Shreveport and the surrounding areas, especially since January, but also since 2024. Louisiana had 13 recorded earthquakes. Now it's more, but that was before today's events, with 5 having a magnitude above 3 and 8 having a magnitude between 2 and 3. And January 5th, they had a magnitude 3.0 around 3.7 miles southeast of Mooringsport. So his explanation to the question, why is northwestern Louisiana experiencing earthquakes? It's Louisiana is located within a geological zone known as the Gulf Coast Basin, but that's an area considered to have low to no seismicity. That's why this comes so as a surprise. So does not rest on any tectonic plate boundary, but instead it's a passive margin with high sediment supply. During early formation of the large sediment deposit, we did have shallow growth faults that formed in the northwestern and southern parts of the state. And these growth faults allow for the movements of blocks of earth over long periods as the sediments are deposited on or above the fault. So this movement, how the professor explains it, eventually causes a displacement of the land, which can cause small, weak earthquakes. So was this lubricated by something man-made to create a bigger earthquake? That is the question. But what he also states is that the earthquakes in Louisiana are usually very shallow. So that's not really surprising. He says 5 kilometers or less. So usually 3 miles or less. So usually connected with large growth faults. And since this basin, it was a large basin, there's lots of sediment, and that sediment moves every once in a while. So his closing sentence is, each year globally, we have over 100,000 earthquakes each year, and they do happen in Louisiana as well. They're typically minor, and most residents do not fear them since they cause no structural damage. But a 4.9 can do some harm. So what I'm about to tell you is the following. So Louisiana is not all of a sudden becoming California, so don't worry about that. But the ground under the Gulf Coast has a deep ancient weakness, and stress can wake that up. And especially in places with heavy surface industry, the scientists have to consider like both geology and human interference. So if you want the real answer to what fault did this, do not look for a super dramatic crack in the ground. We've discussed this. The fault is probably invisible at the surface, so which means the next updates will not come from any image. They will come from data. So this exposed a piece of geology that most people probably didn't know that it existed. So I hope you found this interesting, guys. I will keep you updated as always. And hey, check this out here in the end screen. I mentioned it. It's really, really interesting and weird. And if you want to check out this video here, I heard it. I felt it. A sonic boom. I've never heard anything like this before. I heard jets breaking the sound barrier multiple times. So that doesn't scare me. I even heard an earthquake that made a boom. It was really crazy. But this was scary. It was intense, and you felt the shock wave. And yeah, you need to watch this. See you there in a second. Thank you so much, guys. Bye.